What if the Bible we know today is only a fragment of a larger story? What if hidden in the shadows of time there once was another book, a book read by ancient believers, a book that claimed to reveal divine secrets but was later condemned, silenced, and almost erased? That book is called the Book of Jubilees. Some called it Little Genesis. To others it was dangerous, heretical, and forbidden. But the book did not vanish. Fragments of it survived, preserved in caves, guarded by communities that refused to let it die. And when its pages are opened, they tell us a version of history that feels both familiar and alien. A history where angels controlled time, where laws existed before Moses, where Abraham shattered idols with his own hands, and where the fate of humanity seemed written long before we took our first breath. Imagine you are walking through a vast library in the dead of night. The shelves stretch endlessly, the air is heavy with dust, and the silence feels alive. You see books you recognize: Genesis, Exodus, Psalms. But then in the corner, a shelf marked Forbidden. On it sits a volume with worn leather and fading ink. The title is almost erased, but if you look closely, you can still read the word Jubilees. Why was this book placed here away from the others? Why was it hidden, condemned, while the rest were celebrated as holy? The answer lies not only in theology, but in power. The Book of Jubilees tells a story that threatens to rewrite the foundations of faith itself. Scholars believe it was written around the 2nd century before Christ, most likely by Jewish priests during a time of turmoil. It retells the book of Genesis, but not word for word. Instead, it expands it, reshapes it, and adds details you will not find in any church Bible. It begins not with Adam, not with creation, but with Moses standing on Mount Sinai. There he is not simply handed the 10 Commandments. Instead, according to Jubilees, he is shown the entire history of the world by angels. Time itself is divided into Jubilee cycles of 49 years, like cosmic chapters of creation. The danger of this book lies in what it implies. If angels gave the law, if time itself was a heavenly rhythm, then morality did not begin with Moses or any human prophet. It had existed from the very beginning of creation. That means no priest, no king, no church could ever claim to control it. The law was not theirs to own. It belonged to heaven. That was one reason Jubilees was silenced. By the 4th century, councils of bishops debated which books would form the official canon. Jubilees was not chosen. To the rabbis, it was too radical. To the church, it was too dangerous. Yet not everyone abandoned it. In Ethiopia, the Orthodox Church preserved Jubilees as sacred scripture. To this very day, they read it alongside Genesis and Exodus. For them, it was never forbidden but holy. That fact alone raises a question that shakes the ground beneath us. If one church declares a book holy while another declares it heresy, then who decides the truth? For centuries in the West, the book disappeared. Only whispers remained, citations in ancient commentaries, fragments in obscure texts. Many thought it lost forever. But in the 19th century, explorers rediscovered a complete version in Ethiopia. And in 1947, the Dead Sea Scrolls revealed multiple fragments of Jubilees hidden for over 2,000 years in the caves of Qumran. It was as if the book itself refused to be forgotten, as if history had conspired to preserve its voice, waiting for a time when humanity would once again be ready to listen. And what does this book reveal? It shows us a calendar unlike ours, claiming that humanity has been living out of sync with heaven for thousands of years. It shows angels dictating laws to Adam, Cain, and Noah long before Moses ever walked the earth. It shows Abraham as a warrior against idols, shattering the false gods of his father's house. It reframes circumcision not as a ritual for one people, but as a law of the universe itself. And it gives visions of judgment, end times, and the kingdom of heaven long before the book of Revelation was written. This is not just Genesis retold. It is an alternate Genesis, a shadow scripture, a rival vision of creation and destiny. And it forces us to ask, why do certain books survive in the light while others are buried in darkness? Who has the authority to decide what is holy and what must be silenced? The Book of Jubilees dares to claim that humanity has been living out of sync with heaven's rhythm for millennia. If that is true, then every festival we celebrate, every year we count, every sacred day we honor may already be corrupted. And so as we close the first chapter of this journey, one question lingers. If time itself has been broken, what else has been hidden from us? In the next part, we will open the first great mystery of Jubilees, the calendar of heaven, and discover how angels gave Moses a measure of time that could reshape history itself. When Moses climbed Mount Sinai, the story we know from the Bible says that he received the Ten Commandments carved into stone. But the Book of Jubilees tells a different version. It claims that on that mountain, Moses was not only given commandments, he was given time itself. According to this forbidden book, the angels showed him a calendar, a way of measuring the days that reflected the true rhythm of heaven. And here lies the first secret of Jubilees, a secret that could change everything we thought we knew about a sacred time. The calendar described in Jubilees is not like ours. We live with 365 days in a year, adding a leap day every 4 years to keep our world in balance. But the angels told Moses that the year is 364 days, divided neatly into 52 weeks, 12 months each 30 days long, plus 4 days of transition to mark the seasons. It was perfect, symmetrical, eternal. It was as the book describes the very calendar of heaven. The angels warned Moses of something else. They said that if humanity ever abandoned this heavenly calendar, they would drift into chaos. Festivals would fall on the wrong days. Sacred times would be forgotten. People would lose their connection to the divine order. Imagine that for a moment. In Jubilees, the corruption of religion does not begin with false gods or wicked kings. It begins with time itself slipping out of alignment with heaven. The text even speaks of those who would follow the cycles of the moon instead of the sun. To them, this would be the beginning of error. Days would no longer match the ordained weeks. Festivals would fall earlier or later, never in harmony with heaven. And slowly, humanity would be celebrating shadows, not truth. According to Jubilees, this was not a minor issue of calendars. It was cosmic treason. Think about our world today. Every culture measures time differently. The Gregorian calendar, the Islamic lunar calendar, the Jewish calendar that blends sun and moon. Each one claims authority, but none match the simplicity of Jubilees' 364-day year. If Jubilees is right, then the entire world has been living out of step with heaven's rhythm for thousands of years. Our New Year's celebrations, our festivals, even our holy days, may all be echoes of something broken long ago. Why would such a calendar be so important? For ancient people, time was not just numbers on a page. It was sacred architecture, the blueprint of reality. If you disrupted it, you disrupted the bond between earth and heaven. Jubilees tells us that when people left this calendar behind, they began to forget the very laws of God. It was not simply negligence, it was a spiritual disaster. This belief may sound strange, but history shows us how central calendars have always been to power. The Egyptians used a solar calendar. The Babylonians relied heavily on the moon. The Romans imposed the Julian calendar, and later the Gregorian reform reshaped the way nearly the entire world measures time. Every time a new calendar was enforced, it was not just practical. It was political and often spiritual. Whoever controlled time controlled life. In this sense, the Book of Jubilees exposes a profound truth. It suggests that the first battle for human faith was not fought in temples or on battlefields. It was fought in the keeping of days, in the counting of weeks, in the rhythm of sacred festivals. To abandon the 364-day year was to abandon the order of heaven itself. Now pause and let that sink in. If this is true, then every sacred festival celebrated in error is not just a mistake of scheduling. It is humanity celebrating without heaven. It is worship without harmony. Could it be that for centuries humanity has been drifting further and further from God's order simply because we lost the rhythm of heaven's time? When archaeologists uncovered the Dead Sea Scrolls, they found fragments of Jubilees alongside other texts preserved by the Essenes, a Jewish sect that lived in the desert. The Essenes believed in strict purity, and many scholars think they followed the 364-day calendar. To them, the temple priests in Jerusalem were corrupted because they followed the wrong calendar, celebrating holy days out of time. In other words, the greatest sin of their age was not abandoning sacrifice, but abandoning sacred time. This tells us something crucial. Jubilees was not just an abstract book. It was a manifesto, a challenge, a declaration that most of the world was living in error. By insisting on the calendar of heaven, the book divided communities, exposed tensions, and set believers against one another. Those who followed it saw themselves as guardians of true faith, standing against a majority who had lost their way. And here we face the real danger of Jubilees. Because if time is corrupted, then faith is corrupted. If calendars are wrong, then rituals are meaningless. And if rituals are meaningless, then humanity has lost its path. What does it mean for us today, living in a world that does not even know this calendar exists? Are we already cut off from heaven's rhythm? Perhaps this is why church leaders long ago rejected Jubilees. To accept it would be to admit that most of the faithful had been celebrating in error. To canonize it would be to confess that even the holiest festivals were misaligned with heaven. Such an admission would tear apart the authority of priests, bishops, and kings. Better perhaps to silence the book, to bury it, to call it forbidden. And yet here it is. It has survived. It has returned. It whispers across time that the rhythm of heaven is not what we think it is. It calls us to question everything we assume about sacred days, about holidays, about the very flow of history. So ask yourself, if the Book of Jubilees is right and time itself has been broken, what else might we have lost? If the festivals we celebrate are already corrupted, what does that say about the prayers we speak on those days? If the rhythm of heaven has been forgotten, what other truths may still lie buried in the forbidden books of the past? The angels on Sinai warned Moses that humanity would fall into error. They said that the people would abandon the 364-day year, and they said that when this happened, chaos would spread across the earth. Perhaps if we listen closely, we can still hear that warning, not as an echo from the past, but as a call to the present. This is the mystery of the calendar of heaven, a calendar that claims to be perfect, eternal, and divine, yet lost to nearly every faith today. Was it a mistake to silence this book, or was it necessary to protect the authority of human institutions? And if we dared to return to the rhythm of 364 days, would we find ourselves closer to heaven or lost in confusion? The Book of Jubilees leaves us with questions, not answers, but it forces us to confront something unsettling. If we cannot trust our calendars, can we trust our history? If time itself is corrupt, what does that mean for everything else we hold sacred? And this is only the beginning. For Jubilees does not stop with calendars. Its pages go further into angels' laws and covenants, stretching back to the dawn of humanity. It insists that Adam, Cain, and Noah all received laws from heaven long before Moses. In the next chapter of this journey, we will uncover that claim. We will see how Jubilees rewrites the story of morality itself, and how it dares to say that law existed before humanity ever had a chance to choose. When most of us think about the law of God, we imagine Moses standing on Mount Sinai, the tablets of stone in his hands, lightning flashing, thunder rolling, the people below, trembling in fear. That is the image burned into our minds, the Ten Commandments given once definitive, eternal. But the Book of Jubilees whispers a different story. It dares to say that the law was not new at Sinai. It had existed long before, written into the very fabric of creation. According to Jubilees, Adam himself was taught the law. Cain was warned of sin crouching at his door. Noah was bound by commandments after the flood. Long before Israel, long before Moses, long before any nation was born, the law was already alive. Imagine that for a moment. The story most of us know places the law at the center of Israel's identity. Without Sinai, there is no covenant, no chosen people, no moral framework binding them to God. But Jubilees undermines this foundation. It says the law was never Israel's possession to begin with. It belonged to the universe. It was eternal, cosmic, and guarded by angels. In the opening chapters, Jubilees claims that angels recorded every act of creation, dividing time into sacred cycles. They were not just messengers. They were scribes of eternity, guardians of law itself. These angels taught Adam how to offer sacrifices, how to live in obedience. When Cain killed his brother Abel, he was not just committing a crime of passion. According to Jubilees, he was violating a command that already existed. Sin was not defined at Sinai. It was stalking humanity from the beginning. The book describes Noah receiving laws after the flood. He was commanded not to eat the blood of animals, to avoid idolatry, to establish justice. These rules resemble what later rabbis would call the Noahide laws, a kind of universal morality binding all nations. Jubilees suggests that these were not human inventions. They were heavenly decrees given to Noah through the same angelic intermediaries who would later speak to Moses. In other words, the flood did not wash away lawlessness. It reestablished the eternal law binding humanity again to heaven's order. This perspective changes everything. If Adam, Cain, and Noah already lived under the law, then Sinai was not the beginning. It was a renewal. Moses did not bring something new. He simply reminded Israel of what had always been. That means morality is not tied to culture, nation, or history. It is written into the bones of the world. Pause and consider what this means for free will. If the law is eternal, then human freedom is not the right to invent morality. It is only the choice to obey or disobey what already exists. That raises an unsettling question. Do we truly create our values, or are we only discovering fragments of a code that was always there? Jubilees seems to say that the path of righteousness is older than humanity itself, older than time written by angels before the first breath of Adam. The story of Abraham later reinforces this claim. In Jubilees, Abraham obeys commandments long before Sinai. He avoids idolatry practices, circumcision, and lives as if the law is already known to him. That detail is shocking because it means Abraham is not great simply because of his faith. He is great because he returns to a law that humanity had forgotten. He embodies a memory that most of the world had lost. This raises another question. If Abraham could remember, why did others forget? Why did the majority of humanity drift into idolatry, injustice, and corruption? The angels in Jubilees provide a chilling answer. They say humanity willingly turned away. The knowledge of the law was present, but people silenced it, preferring to serve false gods rather than live in obedience. The loss of the law was not an accident of history. It was a rebellion. Think about Cain again. In Genesis, he simply kills his brother out of jealousy. But in Jubilees, that act takes on cosmic weight. Cain ignores a law that he knew, a law given by God through the angels. His sin is not just violence. It is defiance against eternal order. And when his descendants multiply, they carry that rebellion forward. To the writer of Jubilees, human history is a war between those who remember the eternal law and those who choose to forget. The implications are enormous. If this book is right, then the moral codes of nations are not relative. They are echoes, fragments, distortions of something older. Every civilization, Egypt, Babylon, Greece, Rome, carried faint memories of the eternal law. Their rituals and philosophies were shadows of a truth they once knew but had buried. Jubilees exposes this, reminding its readers that morality does not belong to kings or priests, it belongs to heaven. Perhaps this is why the book was silenced. Because if law is eternal, then religious authorities cannot claim to control it. They cannot declare themselves the sole interpreters. They cannot monopolize truth. The Book of Jubilees levels the ground, declaring that Adam knew the law. Noah practiced it, Abraham obeyed it, and Israel was simply the latest in a long chain of remembrance. To admit this would be to strip institutions of their exclusive power. It was safer to bury the book. Now imagine hearing this 2,000 years ago. You are part of a small community trying to stay faithful in a world dominated by foreign empires. The priests in Jerusalem follow one calendar. The kings enforce their own laws. But you read Jubilees and it tells you that truth is older, deeper, eternal. Would you not feel both empowered and terrified? Empowered because you are part of a cosmic order. Terrified because the world around you is living in rebellion. This is the weight of Jubilees. It is not content with retelling Genesis. It rewrites the story of morality itself. It dares to say that what we think of as human invention, laws, ethics, commandments, were never ours. They were always God's, guarded by angels, whispered to humanity from the beginning. So ask yourself, if the law is older than Moses, what does that mean for us? If Adam was taught to sacrifice, if Noah was commanded to avoid blood, if Abraham obeyed rules long before Sinai, then morality is not flexible. It is fixed. That means every violation is not just cultural rebellion, it is cosmic defiance. And if that is true, then the entire history of humanity is not a search for law, but a struggle against forgetting it. The Book of Jubilees paints a picture of humanity walking away from memory, bearing the eternal law under idols and desires. It reminds us that law is not a gift for one nation, but a pattern for all creation. We do not invent good and evil. We only choose to remember or to forget. That is a sobering thought. Because if we have been forgetting for so long, how much of the eternal law remains hidden from us today? And this leads us to the next mystery. Jubilees does not stop at Adam and Noah. It gives us new details about the flood, about the Nephilim, about the giants born of angels and humans who once walked the earth. According to this forbidden book, the flood was not simply a punishment for human sin. It was also a judgment against these unnatural beings who corrupted creation itself. And when the waters receded, Noah was given new laws to guard humanity from falling again. If the law existed before Moses, then the flood was not just about cleansing the earth. It was about restoring cosmic order. But what exactly happened in those days? Who were the Nephilim, and why did their existence threaten the entire creation? In the next part of our journey, we will uncover this darker secret and see how Jubilees reshapes the story of Noah the flood and the beings that the Bible only hints at. The story of Noah and the great flood is one of the most familiar in the Bible. A righteous man builds an ark, gathers his family and pairs of animals, and survives when the world is drowned in water. But the Book of Jubilees opens a darker door into this story. It tells us the flood was not only about human sin, it was also about beings that should never have existed. Beings born of angels and humans giants called the Nephilim. Their presence corrupted creation itself, and their destruction became one of the reasons the flood came. In Genesis, the Nephilim are mentioned briefly. A few lines about the sons of God who took human women and bore children with them, children described as mighty men, men of renown. The passage is vague, mysterious, and then quickly abandoned. But in Jubilees, the mystery is expanded. Here the Watcher's angels, who were supposed to guard humanity, descend to earth and cross a line that was never meant to be crossed. They take wives among human women, and the offspring of this union are giants. Their appetites are insatiable. They consume resources, they spread violence, they introduce forbidden knowledge, and the world begins to collapse under their weight. The presence of the Nephilim is not simply a mythic flourish. It is a cosmic problem. In the eyes of Jubilees, the boundaries of creation had been broken. Heaven and earth were not meant to mingle this way. Angels had their role, humans had theirs, but the Watchers defied the order. They chose desire over duty, and their children became monsters. To allow them to live was to allow corruption to spread until nothing pure remained. The flood then was not just judgment on humanity, it was judgment on a distorted creation. Noah's role in this version becomes even more crucial. He is not simply a righteous man chosen to survive. He becomes the guardian of a covenant that will reestablish the order of heaven on earth. According to Jubilees, after the flood, Noah offers sacrifices that echo the ones Adam once made. He renews laws that Cain had violated. He is reminded by the angels of commandments meant for all humanity: do not eat blood, do not worship idols, establish justice, honor life. These are presented not as new ideas, but as eternal truths resurfacing after the waters cleanse the world. Imagine standing on the deck of the ark as the waters recede. The world is silent. Everything familiar has been erased. Mountains emerge like scars from the deep. The smell of death lingers in the air. And in that silence, Noah offers burnt offerings, a smoke rising as a signal to heaven that humanity is ready to begin again. But this beginning is different. It is not naive. It carries the memory of corruption, the knowledge that law can be forgotten, that angels themselves can rebel, that creation can be twisted. Noah's covenant is not just about survival, it is about vigilance. The story of the Nephilim also forces us to reconsider the nature of evil. In the traditional telling, human hearts are wicked, and God cleanses the earth with a flood. But Jubilees suggests something even more unsettling. Evil is not just inside humanity. It is introduced from outside by beings of greater power who misuse their freedom. That raises haunting questions. If the angels themselves can rebel, then what does that say about the stability of creation? If the guardians of heaven can fall, who can be trusted to guard the truth? This perspective changes the flood from a children's story into a cosmic war. It is no longer just about God punishing bad people. It is about resetting the balance of the universe, erasing a contamination that threatened all life. The ark becomes not just a boat, but a vessel of memory, carrying forward the eternal law while everything else is drowned. The waters are not only judgment, they are purification. Jubilees also gives us details about the covenant made with Noah. The rainbow we know from Genesis is still there, but it is framed differently. It is not just a promise never to flood the earth again. It is a reminder that humanity is bound by eternal law and that breaking it will always bring consequences. The rainbow is less a comfort and more a warning. Look at it and remember the order of heaven will not be mocked. Consider what this means for us today. We live in a world that often treats morality as flexible, adaptable, relative. But Jubilees insists that the law is cosmic, eternal, and unchanging. To violate it is to invite chaos. To ignore it is to open the door to corruption. The Nephilim may be gone, but the temptation to rebel against the boundaries of creation is not. Every generation faces its own flood, not of water, but of forgetting, of abandoning what is sacred. Perhaps this is why Jubilees was considered dangerous. It does not let us rest in comfortable myths. It forces us to face the possibility that creation itself can unravel when boundaries are broken. It confronts us with the idea that evil is not just human weakness, but cosmic rebellion. And it reminds us that survival depends not on strength, but on remembering the law written from the beginning. When we read Genesis, we see Noah as a man of faith, obedient in building an ark. When we read Jubilees, we see Noah as something more. He is a priest of memory carrying forward eternal decrees. His sacrifice after the flood is not just gratitude, it is renewal. His covenant is not just for his family, it is for all nations for all time. In his obedience, the law is remembered again. And yet the story does not end there. Jubilees continues beyond Noah into the life of Abraham. And here it takes another bold step. For Abraham is not portrayed simply as a man called to leave his homeland or a father willing to sacrifice his son. He becomes a warrior against idols, a destroyer of false gods, a man who stands alone against the worship of his own family. His story is not just faith, it is defiance. So as we leave the floodwaters behind and step into the deserts of Mesopotamia, we must ask, what does it mean to shatter idols? What does it cost to oppose the false gods of one's culture, one's family, one's world? In the next part of this journey, we will uncover the story of Abraham in the Book of Jubilees and see how his battle against idols was not just personal, but cosmic. The story of Abraham is one of the most celebrated in all of Scripture. We know him as the father of faith, the man who left his homeland to follow the call of God, the one who trusted even when asked to sacrifice his son. But the Book of Jubilees paints a sharper, more radical portrait of this man. In its pages, Abraham is not just a wanderer of faith. He is a warrior against idols. His story begins not with quiet obedience, but with defiance, with the destruction of the false gods that surrounded him. According to Jubilees, Abraham grew up in a world saturated with idols. His own father's house was filled with them, figures of wood and stone, lifeless images before which men bowed and women sacrificed. Abraham watched as people poured their devotion into objects they themselves had crafted, and something in him rebelled. He could not accept that pieces of stone and wood were divine. He could not bow before what his own hands could carve. So as the book tells us, he rose against them. He smashed the idols in his father's house, shattering them to fragments, defying the very culture that raised him. Imagine the scene. A young man in a dim room surrounded by towering statues, the smell of incense heavy in the air. Outside, people chant, believing their gods will bring rain or war or children. And in that silence, Abraham lifts his hand and strikes. The idol falls. Stone splinters, dust rises. One by one, he destroys them all, until the room is filled not with gods, but with rubble. In that moment, Abraham is no longer just a son of his father. He becomes a challenger of his world. But this act is more than rebellion. Jubilees interprets it as revelation. Abraham's defiance was not only against idols of stone, it was against the very idea that human beings can define what is divine. He saw the emptiness of false worship and turned to the one unseen God, the God of heaven, who needs no image. In his destruction of idols, he affirmed a deeper truth that divinity cannot be carved, contained, or confined. This act of smashing idols is a turning point in the narrative. In Genesis, Abraham's story begins with a call, "Leave your land, your people, and your father's house." But in Jubilees, we understand why he could leave. He had already broken with his father's gods. He had already rejected the false images that bound his people. His journey was not just physical, it was spiritual. It was a journey out of illusion into truth. Consider what this means. Faith as we often imagine it is quiet trust. But Jubilees presents a more dangerous vision. Faith begins with defiance. Faith begins with saying no to the world's idols. Abraham did not simply drift into faith. He tore down the lies around him. He risked his family's anger, his culture's wrath, and his own safety. Faith was not passive, it was revolutionary. This raises a question for us today. What idols surround us, they may not be statues of stone, but they exist. Wealth, power, beauty, success, technology, objects of devotion that demand our loyalty. Like the idols of Abraham's world, they promise blessings, but they cannot speak, cannot act, cannot save. To follow the God of heaven may still require us to shatter these false gods. And that is never easy. Jubilees pushes us to see Abraham as more than a patriarch. He is a prototype of courage. He teaches us that true faith is not comfortable. It begins by breaking with the familiar, with the things our culture bows to without question. In smashing idols, Abraham risked everything. But in that destruction, he discovered freedom. The book also tells us that Abraham did not stand alone. Angels watched over him, guiding his steps. His defiance was not reckless, but aligned with the eternal law that had existed from the beginning. When he rejected idols, he was not inventing a new religion. He was remembering the old truth, the truth Adam knew the truth. Noah renewed after the flood. Abraham was a link in the chain of remembrance, one more guardian of the eternal covenant. There is something cinematic in this image. Picture Abraham walking out of his father's house after smashing the idols. Behind him, smoke still rises from shattered incense. Around him, the crowd murmurs in shock. His father's face is pale with rage. Yet Abraham does not look back. His eyes are fixed on the horizon, where the unseen God calls him forward. That moment captures the essence of Jubilees Abraham. He is not defined by where he came from, but by what he refused to worship. And so when the voice of God calls him to leave his homeland, Abraham is ready. He has already left in spirit. His body only follows what his soul has already chosen. He goes not as a refugee, but as a pioneer. Every step he takes is away from idols and toward eternity. His journey is the physical echo of his spiritual break. This reading of Abraham challenges us. We like to think of faith as gentle, as personal, as private. But Jubilees insists it is also public, disruptive, and even violent. To follow God is to make a stand. It is to topple the false gods that others cling to. It is to risk misunderstanding, rejection, and loss. Abraham's story forces us to ask, what idols have we been too afraid to break? And yet there is hope in his example. Because in tearing down the false, Abraham made space for the true. In rejecting lifeless idols, he encountered the living God. His courage did not end in emptiness, but in revelation. Perhaps this is the deeper meaning of his act. Destruction was only the first step. Discovery was the second. Think about how this pattern repeats throughout history. Prophets stand against kings. Reformers challenge traditions. Truth seekers question authority. Every great movement begins with an Abrahamic moment, the courage to smash the idols of one's age. Jubilee shows us that Abraham was the first but not the last. His defiance echoes through the centuries, calling us to examine what we worship. As we reflect on this, consider the cost Abraham bore. He risked his family's rejection, his community's anger, his own safety. Faith was not rewarded instantly, it was tested. And yet through that test, Abraham became the father of nations. His story is not just about personal devotion, it is about cosmic loyalty. By smashing idols, he aligned himself with the eternal law of heaven. But the story of Abraham and Jubilees does not stop with shattered stone. It continues with something even more intimate, something etched not into walls or statues, but into flesh itself. The book tells us that Abraham embraced circumcision not only as a ritual for his descendants, but as a cosmic law, a sign that reached beyond Israel, binding humanity to heaven's order. It was not just tradition, it was eternity carved into the body. And so as we leave Abraham's father's house filled with rubble and follow him into a new covenant, we face another question. If idols can be shattered outside of us, what happens when the sign of covenant is placed upon us? What does it mean when the eternal law is no longer around us, but within our very flesh? In the next part of this journey, we will explore the mystery of circumcision in the Book of Jubilees and why it was not seen as a custom for one people, but as a law of the universe itself. For most people, circumcision is remembered as a ritual given to Abraham, a mark of covenant between God and his descendants, a sign that set Israel apart from the nations. In Genesis, it is described as a command for Abraham and his household, a practice passed down through his sons, a boundary marker of identity. But the Book of Jubilees lifts this ritual out of the realm of human culture and places it in the very fabric of the cosmos. In its telling, circumcision is not just a custom of Israel, it is a law of the universe, a sign that belongs not only to one people, but to all of creation. Imagine Abraham after his defiance of idols, standing under the open sky, looking up at the countless stars. He has already broken ties with false gods. He has already chosen the unseen God who calls him forward. But now, according to Jubilees, the covenant goes deeper. It is written not only in stone, not only in words, but in flesh itself. Circumcision becomes a permanent seal, a cosmic reminder that his life, his body, and his descendants belong to the eternal law. In Genesis, circumcision is a commandment for Abraham's household. In Jubilees, the language is far more sweeping. The book insists that this practice was not just cultural, not just symbolic, but eternal. It had existed from the beginning, ordained in heaven, remembered by the angels, and reaffirmed in Abraham. The act of circumcision, therefore, was not a new invention. It was a rediscovery, a return to a law that was always there. Think of what this means. If circumcision is eternal, then it is not optional. It is not just a matter of identity for one people. It is a cosmic sign that humanity is bound to heaven. To reject it, Jubilees warns, is to reject the covenant itself, to cut oneself off from the eternal law. In this way, the ritual becomes more than a physical act. It is a visible line drawn across history, dividing those who remember from those who forget. This raises uncomfortable questions. If such a command was truly eternal, why do so many nations live without it? Why do cultures across the world not practice what Jubilees calls a universal law? The answer the book suggests is forgetfulness and rebellion. Humanity strayed from the eternal order, choosing convenience over covenant, desire over discipline. Just as the calendar was abandoned, so too was this sign. The result was not only cultural drift, but spiritual corruption. To understand the power of this picture, Abraham in old age, gathering his family, his servants, his sons. One by one they are circumcised. It is not a private act. It is communal, public, and irreversible. Each cut is a declaration we belong to the eternal God, not to idols, not to nations, not even to ourselves. The pain is sharp, the memory permanent. It is as if the covenant is inscribed into their very bodies so that they cannot forget, even if they wish to. This image is startling, perhaps even disturbing, but that is its point. Jubilees wants us to feel the weight of covenant, the cost of faith, the permanence of law. The book does not allow religion to be abstract. It insists it is embodied. It lives in flesh and blood in the physical reality of life. For Jubilees, there is no such thing as faith that does not cost something. Now consider how radical this vision is compared to the world around Abraham. In Mesopotamia, Egypt, and Canaan, rituals were often tied to cycles of fertility harvest or local gods. They could be changed, adapted, or abandoned as kingdoms rose and fell. But in Jubilees, circumcision is eternal, unchanging, cosmic. It does not belong to a tribe or a time. It belongs to the universe. In that sense, Abraham's obedience is not cultural. It is transcendent. He is aligning himself with a law that was written before nations, before history. This brings us to a profound philosophical tension. If the covenant is written in flesh, what does that mean for human freedom? Can we still choose, or are we forever marked? Perhaps the deeper meaning is this: true freedom is not the absence of marks. It is the choice of which marks we bear. Abraham chose to bear the sign of heaven, to let his body testify to his allegiance. In doing so, he taught his descendants that covenant is not an idea. It is life itself. There is another layer here. In Jubilees, circumcision is tied not only to Abraham's family, but to cosmic memory. The angels themselves are said to observe and record. To them, circumcision is not just a human ritual. It is a declaration that heaven can see. It tells the unseen world that a man belongs to God. It is both visible and invisible, a sign for earth and a testimony before heaven. Of course, such a view was controversial. To declare circumcision a cosmic law is to declare that those who do not practice it are outside the covenant, excluded from eternity. It is no wonder, then, that many traditions resisted this book. The claim was too sweeping, too absolute. It threatened to divide humanity into those who were marked and those who were lost. It placed too much weight on a single ritual. Yet perhaps that was exactly the point. Jubilees sought to remind a forgetful world that covenant is costly and that memory is not optional. Think of it this way. Every culture has ways of marking its members. Tattoos, clothing rites of passage names. Each one says, this is who I am, this is where I belong. Circumcision in Jubilees functions the same way, but on a cosmic scale. It is not about tribe or nation. It is about creation itself. It is the ultimate declaration of belonging. So ask yourself, what marks do we bear today? They may not be carved into our flesh, but they exist. The careers we choose, the possessions we value, the habits we cultivate, each one marks us in some way. The question is not whether we are marked, but by what and for whom. Abraham's choice was painful, permanent, and undeniable. But it was also liberating. It freed him from the illusion that he could belong to idols, to nations, to anything less than the eternal God. The Book of Jubilees leaves us with a challenge. If covenant is embodied, how do we embody our faith today? Do we live as though our devotion is only an idea, or do we carry it in ways that cannot be hidden, forgotten, or erased? Perhaps this is why Jubilees insists on circumcision as cosmic law. It does not want us to forget that faith is not convenient. It demands something real, something that leaves a mark. But the story does not end with Abraham's covenant. Jubilees moves forward into the lives of his descendants, expanding on stories we thought we knew. It tells us more about Jacob and Esau, about Joseph, about the choices that shaped nations. And in its telling, these stories are not merely family dramas. They are cosmic dramas, echoes of the eternal law playing out in human lives. So as we leave Abraham's camp with its altar of shattered idols and its men newly circumcised, we prepare to follow the next generation. We will see how the eternal law shaped their destinies, how rivalry and reconciliation, betrayal and forgiveness were all framed within a cosmic order that began before time itself. In the next part of our journey, we will uncover the stories of Jacob, Esau, and Joseph, and see how the forbidden book reshaped their lives into reflections of heaven's eternal plan. The Book of Jubilees does not stop with Abraham. It lingers over his descendants, expanding their stories with details absent from Genesis, reshaping family struggles into reflections of eternal law. Jacob, Esau, and Joseph are not merely men caught in drama. They are actors in a cosmic play, their choices bound to heaven's rhythm. To read them through Jubilees is to see family tension not as accident, but as destiny woven into the fabric of creation itself. Consider Jacob and Esau. Genesis tells us of two brothers born struggling in the womb, divided in character and fate. Esau, the hunter, impulsive, earthy. Jacob, the quiet one, patient, calculating. The familiar story has Jacob buying Esau's birthright with a bowl of stew, then deceiving Isaac to receive the blessing. It is a tale of rivalry and trickery ending in estrangement, but Jubilees gives more weight to this division. It frames Jacob and Esau not just as brothers, but as embodiments of two paths, the path of remembrance and the path of forgetfulness. In Jubilees, Jacob is portrayed as the one who honors the eternal law, even when it costs him. Esau, by contrast, is shown as one who disregards it, treating the covenant lightly, despising what is sacred. His sale of the birthright is not merely foolish hunger. It is rebellion, a rejection of destiny. When he chooses appetite over inheritance, he symbolizes the human choice to live by desire rather than by memory of heaven. Jacob, though imperfect, clings to the promise, holding fast to the law of his ancestors. To Jubilees, the blessing of Jacob is not stolen. It is rightfully his because he alone valued what Esau despised. This interpretation deepens the drama. It is no longer about sibling rivalry. It is about the struggle of humanity itself between honoring the eternal law and abandoning it for the immediate. The story asks each listener, are you Jacob remembering what matters, or Esau selling eternity for a moment of hunger? Then comes Joseph the dreamer, the beloved son betrayed by his brothers. In Genesis, his story is already rich with intrigue, betrayal, slavery, rise to power, forgiveness. But Jubilees adds new shades. It emphasizes Joseph's faithfulness to the eternal law even in exile. When tempted by Potiphar's wife, Joseph's refusal is not simply moral restraint. It is obedience to a cosmic command, a remembrance of the covenant, even in a foreign land. He becomes not only a survivor, but a guardian of sacred memory in Egypt. Jubilees highlights the providence behind Joseph's suffering. His descent into slavery, his imprisonment, his rise to Pharaoh's court, all are framed as instruments of divine law. Nothing is accident. Even betrayal is turned into fulfillment. Joseph himself declares that God used what his brothers meant for evil as a path to preserve life. But Jubilees presses the lesson further. It portrays Joseph as an image of righteous endurance, showing that those who cling to the eternal law cannot truly be destroyed. Their suffering becomes a stage on which God's order is revealed. Picture Joseph in the dim Egyptian prison chains, on his wrists darkness pressing close. To anyone else, it would seem the end. But Joseph remembers the God of his fathers. He remembers the covenant sealed in Abraham's flesh, the blessing passed through Jacob. Even in chains, he does not forget. And because he remembers, he becomes the one who interprets dreams, the one who sees patterns where others see chaos. His remembrance unlocks Egypt's survival, saving nations from famine. The story of Joseph in Jubilees is not just about personal triumph. It is about the resilience of the eternal law. Even in a foreign land, under pagan rulers, the law still works. The covenant is still alive. Joseph becomes a testimony that memory cannot be drowned by slavery, cannot be silenced by betrayal, cannot be erased by exile. As long as even one man remembers, the law endures. Now think about the arc of these stories together. Jacob cherishes the covenant, Esau despises it, Joseph preserves it. The pattern is clear. Humanity divides itself not by blood but by memory. Those who honor the eternal law remain in covenant no matter where they live. Those who despise it cut themselves off, even if they are sons of Abraham. Jubilees insist that covenant is not inheritance by flesh, it is inheritance by remembrance. This vision is powerful, but also dangerous, because it challenges any easy assumption about belonging. It suggests that lineage is not enough. Ritual is not enough. Only those who honor the eternal law truly stand in covenant. That is a sharp blade cutting through complacency. It tells us that we too must choose. We cannot rely on identity, heritage, or community. We must decide daily whether to be Jacob or Esau, Joseph, or his brothers. Pause here and ask yourself, how often do we sell eternity for a bowl of stew? How often do we trade what is sacred for what is convenient? How often do we despise our own birthright without realizing it? Jubilees confronts us with the uncomfortable truth that forgetting is easy, but remembering is costly. Jacob remembered, Joseph remembered, and that is why their names endure. This perspective also sheds light on forgiveness. In Genesis, Joseph forgives his brothers in a moving scene. In Jubilees, this forgiveness is not only personal, it is cosmic. By forgiving Joseph restores the memory of covenant to his family. He refuses to let bitterness sever the chain of remembrance. Forgiveness becomes not just kindness, but obedience to eternal law. It is a way of remembering that vengeance does not belong to man, but to God. Imagine that reunion. The brothers trembling before Joseph, terrified of retribution. Joseph dressed in Egyptian robes with power to destroy them. And then his voice breaking as he says, "Do not fear. What you meant for evil, God used for good." In that moment, the eternal law shines brighter than any throne. Memory triumphs over betrayal. The covenant endures through mercy. Jubilees pushes us to see that the story of Jacob, Esau, and Joseph is not ancient family drama. It is the human story. We all face the temptation of Esau, the challenge of Jacob, the suffering of Joseph. We all must choose whether to despise or to honor, to forget, or to remember, to betray or to forgive. And in those choices, we reveal whether we walk in covenant or abandon it. But the book does not leave us here. It moves forward again to Moses, to Sinai, to the moment when law and covenant are revealed in thunder and fire. But Jubilees insists even here that this is not new. It is the eternal law reaffirmed, the cosmic pattern remembered once more. The mountain blazes with fire, but the truth it reveals is older than the stones themselves. And so as we leave the tents of Jacob and the courts of Pharaoh, we prepare to climb Sinai. We prepare to see Moses not just as a prophet of Israel, but as a man who was reminded of what had always been true. In the next part of our journey, we will ascend the mountain of fire and uncover how the Book of Jubilees reframes Moses as the keeper of the eternal law. When we think of Moses on Mount Sinai, we imagine the most dramatic scene in all of Scripture, The mountain trembling, thunder echoing across the desert, lightning cutting the sky, fire burning at the summit. The people stand below in terror, forbidden even to touch the mountain. And in the midst of that chaos, Moses climbs upward into the storm. There we are told he receives the 10 Commandments carved in stone by the finger of God. That is the story most of us know. But the Book of Jubilees stretches the frame wider. It says that what Moses received on Sinai was not simply 10 words on stone tablets. He was given the blueprint of creation itself. According to Jubilees, when Moses entered the fire at Sinai, he was met not only by God's voice but by angels, the same angels who had taught Adam, who had instructed Noah, who had guided Abraham. These angels revealed to Moses that the law he was about to receive was not new. It was ancient. It had existed before the world began. It had been recorded in heavenly tablets long before Israel set foot in Egypt. Moses was not the first to hear it. He was the one chosen to remind humanity of what it had already forgotten. Think of the weight of that claim. In Genesis, the law seems to begin with Israel. In Exodus, it appears at Sinai for the first time. But Jubilees insists the law was written into the universe from the beginning. The commandments were not inventions for one people. They were eternal decrees that governed angels, humans, and creation itself. When Moses descended with tablets in hand, he was not carrying something new. He was carrying a reminder, a revelation of what had always been true. Imagine the scene through the eyes of Moses. The fire blazes around him, heat pressing against his skin. Thunder shakes the mountain, yet within the storm he sees order, not chaos. Angels stand as scribes of eternity, holding tablets inscribed with cosmic law. They tell him that the festivals, the Sabbaths, the offerings are not temporary customs, but reflections of heaven's order. They tell him that the covenant stretches back to Adam, reaffirmed by Noah, renewed by Abraham, and now entrusted to him once again. Moses realizes that he is not inventing faith, he is restoring it. This changes how we see the Exodus. In the traditional story, a nation of slaves is given laws to shape them into a people. In Jubilees, those laws already existed. Sinai becomes not the birth of covenant, but the renewal of memory. Israel is not chosen to receive something new, but to guard something eternal. Their task is not to create holiness, but to preserve it. The philosophical implications are profound. If law is eternal, then sin is not breaking arbitrary rules. Sin is rebellion against the very structure of creation. To violate the Sabbath is not to disobey a cultural custom. It is to resist the rhythm of heaven itself. To worship idols is not to make a personal mistake. It is to deny the order of the cosmos. The stakes are higher, heavier, more cosmic than we ever imagined. And this explains why Moses' role is so important. He is not simply a prophet or a leader. He is a mediator between heaven and earth. He carries in his hands not just stone, but eternity. The Book of Jubilees portrays him as one entrusted with the cosmic memory, chosen to pass it on so that humanity might not forget again. His leadership is not political, it is priestly. He stands as a guardian of eternal law, binding earth to heaven through memory. Now pause and think of what this means for Israel at the foot of the mountain. They see fire and hear thunder, but they do not realize that their history is being reframed. They believe they are receiving something new, a covenant unique to them. But in Jubilees telling, what is happening is larger. Humanity is being reminded of what was lost. Israel becomes the keeper of memory, a witness to all nations, that law is not theirs alone, but belongs to the fabric of existence. Why then would such a vision be silenced? Perhaps because it strips power from institutions. If law is eternal, priests cannot claim to create it. If law was given to Adam, Noah, and Abraham before Moses, then Israel cannot claim exclusive ownership. The church councils that form the canon may have found this vision too destabilizing. Better to present the law as a unique covenant controlled and mediated by human authority. Easier to manage, easier to defend, easier to claim as one's own. But Jubilees refuses to cooperate. It reminds us that no one owns the law. It belongs to heaven. Consider what this means for us today. We live in a world that often treats morality as relative shifting, with culture flexible with circumstance. But Jubilees says morality is not ours to bend. It is eternal, unchanging, written in the structure of creation. We can deny it, forget it, twist it, but we cannot erase it. To sin is not to break a rule. It is to fight against reality itself. And in the long run, reality always wins. Picture Moses descending the mountain tablets in hand, his face radiant with firelight. The people below see stone, but Moses sees memory. He knows these words are not new but ancient. He knows they stretch back through generations, guarded by angels, remembered by patriarchs. He knows his task is not to invent, but to remind. The burden he carries is not only law, but the weight of eternal truth. This reframing also reshapes how we see Israel's mission. They are not a chosen people in the sense of exclusive privilege. They are chosen to remember. They are chosen to guard the eternal covenant for a world that forgets. Their story is not about superiority, but about stewardship. They are witnesses, not owners. And that witness has never been easy, because to remember what others forget is to stand apart. To honor a rhythm of time, a law of heaven, a covenant of eternity, is to look strange, even foolish in the eyes of nations. Yet Jubilees insist that this is the path of faith. True faith is not creating new truth, but remembering old ones. It is living in harmony with a reality others refuse to see. So where does this leave us? If Moses carried down the eternal law, if the commandments are not new but ancient, then we too are bound. We cannot say that was for them, not for us. We cannot treat law as negotiable, as cultural. We must ask, are we remembering or are we forgetting? Are we living in rhythm with heaven or have we drifted into chaos? The Book of Jubilees leaves us with no easy answers, but it does leave us with a warning. Forgetfulness is not neutral. It is rebellion, and rebellion brings consequences. The flood was one such consequence. The exile of nations was another, and the silence of forbidden books may be yet another. The choice before us is simple, though never easy to remember, or to forget to honor the eternal law, or to despise it like Esau, to endure like Joseph, or to betray like his brothers. As we close this chapter, picture again the mountain of Sinai blazing with fire. Moses stands between heaven and earth, carrying tablets inscribed with eternity. The people wait below, trembling, unaware that the words about to shape their nation were not new at all. They were as old as creation itself. And perhaps that is the greatest revelation of all, that truth does not need to be invented. It only needs to be remembered. But Jubilees does not end at Sinai. It pushes forward into visions of prophecy of angels of judgment and the end of days. It dares to show us a cosmic horizon beyond Moses, beyond Israel, beyond history itself. And so the question lingers: if law is eternal, what does it say about the end of time? In the next part of our journey, we will uncover the prophecies of Jubilees and how they speak of the last days of angels standing in judgment and of a kingdom that is yet to come. The Book of Jubilees does not end with history. It dares to look forward, to lift the veil on the future, to speak of judgment and destiny. Its final chapters move beyond the stories of Adam and Noah, Abraham and Jacob, Moses and Sinai, into visions of the end of days. And here the voice of the forbidden book becomes almost unbearable, for it declares that the same eternal law written into creation will also stand at the end of time to judge it. According to Jubilees, history is not a circle of endless repetition. It is a straight path divided into cycles, jubilees of 49 years, unfolding toward an appointed conclusion. Time itself is measured with precision, like chapters written long before we open the book. Angels guard these cycles, recording the deeds of nations, waiting for the moment when memory and judgment converge. The story of humanity is not random. It is a countdown. The book speaks of a great day when the wicked will be destroyed and the righteous will shine like the light of heaven. Angels will stand as witnesses, testifying to the deeds of every soul. Nothing will be hidden, nothing forgotten. The same scribes who recorded Adam's fall, Noah's covenant, and Abraham's obedience will open their records and present them before the throne. In that moment, all masks will be stripped away. Every hidden act, every forgotten choice will return in clarity. Imagine it. The heavens open, the earth trembling, the nations gathered like dust before eternity. The angels silent scribes for millennia, unrolling scrolls filled with human history. Kings and beggars, prophets and betrayers, all standing equal before the same law. The memory of creation itself rising to testify. It is not only dramatic, it is terrifying. Because if the law is eternal, then none of us can plead ignorance. We cannot say we did not know. The truth was always there, written in heaven, waiting for us to remember. The Book of Jubilees does not describe this vision with the wild imagery of Revelation. No beast with many heads, no dragons or rivers of fire. Instead, it is almost cold in its clarity. Judgment is simple. Those who honored the eternal law will stand in light. Those who despised it will vanish in darkness. Heaven and earth will be purified. The end is not chaos, but order restored. The rebellion of angels, the violence of giants, the forgetfulness of nations, all will be erased. Only harmony will remain. This vision raises unsettling questions. If time is already measured in jubilees, does that mean the end is already fixed? Do we live inside a story whose ending has been written long before we were born? Or does our remembrance and forgetfulness still matter, still tip the scale? Jubilees holds both truths together. The end is certain, but our part in it is not. The law will stand. The only question is whether we stand with it or against it. Think of how this would have sounded to those who first read it. Small communities often oppressed by empires watching their world crumble under foreign power. For them, this vision was not despair, it was hope. It was the assurance that Rome, Babylon, Greece, all the great empires were nothing more than dust in the face of eternity. Their power was temporary. The eternal law was permanent. And when the final jubilee arrived, the oppressors would vanish and the faithful would endure. This is why the book's vision is both dangerous and comforting. Dangerous because it destabilized earthly powers, declaring that kings were nothing before heaven's order. Comforting because it promised that suffering was not the end. The oppressed could look at their pain and say, this too will pass, for judgment belongs to God. The imagery of angels is especially powerful in these chapters. Throughout Jubilees, angels are not distant figures. They are scribes, guardians, messengers, participants in history. At the end of time, they become witnesses, standing with records of every act. Their presence reminds us that nothing is lost. Every choice echoes in eternity. The smallest act of faith, the smallest act of rebellion, they all remain. Judgment is not arbitrary, it is memory unveiled. Picture the final scene, a vast assembly under the heavens, scrolls unrolled, angels reading aloud the story of every soul, and above them the throne of God, radiant with a light that no eye can endure. In that light, the righteous stand like stars, their lives aligned with the eternal law. The wicked are like shadows vanishing in the brilliance. No debate, no excuses, no negotiation, only truth. The end is the restoration of what was always meant to be. For us today, this vision is both haunting and challenging. We live in a world that hides behind excuses, that treats truth as negotiable. But Jubilees cuts through the noise. It says the end is not about what we claimed to believe, but about what we remembered. Did we live in harmony with the eternal law, or did we despise it? Did we honor the covenant, or did we sell it for a bowl of stew like Esau? In the end, all the illusions fall away, and the only thing that remains is whether we chose to remember or to forget. This is the sobering power of the forbidden book. It tells us that time itself is sacred, that law is eternal, and that judgment is certain. And yet it also tells us that the end is not despair, but restoration. The same God who wrote the law into creation will one day erase rebellion from it. The same angels who recorded history will one day close the book. The story ends not in chaos, but in peace. And so we are left with a question. If the end is already written, then why was this book silenced? Why was its vision hidden, its voice buried, its message condemned? Perhaps because it dared to remind humanity of what rulers wanted us to forget, that their power is temporary, that their empires will crumble, that eternity belongs not to them, but to God. As we turn to the final part of this journey, we must face that question. Why did the Book of Jubilees vanish from the canon? Was it simply too radical, too strange, too difficult to preserve? Or was there something more, an intentional decision to bury truths that were too dangerous for the powers of men? In the final part, we will explore why this book was silenced and what its disappearance means for us today. We have walked through the shadows of a forbidden book. We have seen its vision of time as a rhythm set by heaven, its insistence that law existed before Moses, its account of Noah and the Nephilim, its portrayal of Abraham as a destroyer of idols, its description of circumcision as a cosmic law, its expansions on the stories of Jacob, Esau, and Joseph, its reframing of Moses as a guardian of eternal truth, and its prophecy of a final judgment where memory and eternity meet. And now as we reach the end, one question lingers above all the rest. If the Book of Jubilees carried such profound visions, why was it silenced? Why was it erased from the canon, dismissed as heresy, buried in caves and monasteries until modern times? The answer is not simple. Some will say it was forgotten because it was too strange, too mystical, too full of angels and cosmic visions. Others argue it was because Jubilees was tied to small communities on the margins of Judaism, groups like the Essenes, who lived in the desert and rejected the mainstream temple. When those groups disappeared, so too did their scriptures. History often belongs to the winners, and Jubilees was not among them. But perhaps there is another reason, one far more unsettling. Perhaps the Book of Jubilees was buried because it was too dangerous to the powers of its time. Think about what it claimed. It declared that law was eternal, not given to one people, not controlled by priests or kings, but written into the very structure of creation. It said morality did not begin at Sinai, but existed from Adam. It insisted that Israel was chosen not to invent truth, but to remember it for all nations. And it dared to prophesy that empires and rulers would one day vanish in the face of eternal judgment. Such ideas undermine human authority. They strip away the illusion that institutions own holiness. They remind us that no man, no council, no empire can claim to define what belongs to heaven. For leaders building religious and political order, such a vision was threatening. Better to present the law as something new, something given once for all to a chosen nation, something that could be guarded and controlled. Better to silence a book that declared the law was older than nations, older than kings, older even than the world itself. Better to bury a book that proclaimed every empire would be dust in the end. And so the councils of rabbis and bishops chose other books. Genesis, Exodus, the prophets, the Psalms. They shaped a canon that was stable, that could unite communities, that could support institutions. Jubilees was left behind, too radical, too dangerous, too destabilizing. For centuries it slept in silence known only to a few. Yet silence is not death. The book survived. In Ethiopia, it was preserved as scripture read with reverence beside Genesis and Exodus. In the caves of Qumran, fragments waited like buried embers, ready to ignite again. In the 19th century, explorers stumbled upon it once more, and the forbidden book breathed into modern light. It had waited patient as stone for its voice to be heard again. So now we must ask, what do we do with it? Do we dismiss it as an ancient curiosity, a relic of sectarian imagination? Or do we listen not to take every word as binding, but to hear the challenge it whispers across time? That truth is not invented, but remembered. That law is not flexible, but eternal. That every generation must decide whether to cherish or to despise what is sacred. Perhaps this is the real reason the Book of Jubilees matters. Not because it tells us facts we did not know, but because it confronts us with choices we would rather avoid. Do we live as if time itself is sacred? Do we treat morality as eternal or as something to be negotiated? Do we smash the idols of our age or bow before them? Do we remember or do we forget? The forgotten book becomes a mirror. It shows us not only the past but ourselves. It forces us to see that the struggle between Jacob and Esau, between Joseph and his brothers, between Moses and his people, is the same struggle we face: to remember or to forget, to honor or to despise, to live in harmony with the eternal law or to pretend it does not exist. And maybe that is why forbidden books are never truly gone. They return again and again to remind us of what we lost, to disturb our comfort, to whisper truths we tried to bury. They come back because memory itself refuses to die. Picture this: a dark cave in Qumran, sealed for 2,000 years. Inside, scrolls wrapped in linen, cracked by time, waiting in silence. Outside, empires rise and fall, temples burn, councils meet, nations forget. And then in the 20th century, a shepherd boy throws a stone, a jar breaks, and the silence ends. The Book of Jubilees breathes again. The forbidden speaks once more. The question now is not why it was silenced. The question is what we will do with it. Will we dismiss it as irrelevant, or will we let it challenge us, disturb us, remind us? Because if Jubilees is right, then the eternal law still waits for us to remember, and judgment still waits for us at the end of time. As we close this journey, one truth remains. Books can be silenced, but truth cannot. Councils can choose canons, but they cannot erase eternity. Scrolls can be hidden, but they cannot be destroyed forever. The Book of Jubilees has returned, and with it a whisper from the ancient world, remember. And so I leave you with a question, the same question that haunted those who first read it, the same question that lingers whenever forbidden knowledge rises from the dust. If the truth has been buried once, how many other truths lie waiting still? What else has been hidden from us, sealed away in caves, waiting for the moment when we are finally ready to hear?